that one attains to the Supreme Brahman, who dissolves the mind, intellect, the gross and subtle elements, the gross and subtle senses, all into the Atman, the indivisible self of all living beings. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetananam Eko Bahunam Yo Viditati Kaman Tamatmastam Yenu Pashanti Diraha Desham Shanti Shashvati Netaresham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. That one who is the eternal among non-eternal things, who is the intelligence of the most intelligent ones. The wise ones who know that Brahman, to them belong peace and to none else. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karabo Vahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvisho Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the Dharma teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. And so we meet again here in our usual fashion, that is, with our preference being studying the dharmas of India, the various darshanas, and we do that over a series of months, weeks, and years with these series of classes and also visits to the mainland to give retreats 4 times a year. This is the SRV associations and what we turn our minds and wills and our energy and even our very bodies to as we dedicate ourselves to the great teachings and great teachers like Sri Ram, whose birthday it is today. We always like to sing to him with the many beautiful Ram bhajans that are there. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Aruna Bhava Bhayadaranam. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Aruna Bhava Bhayadaranam. And so forth. Beautiful verses out of various bhajans that we sing to the great Sri Ram, who was Sri Krishna in an earlier lifetime, and whose beautiful teachings that find themselves into great scriptures like the Ramayana and the Adhyatma Ramayana, the non-dual portion of that, we find very illuminating and very uplifting. And particularly since he was so many thousands of years before Christ, and we find the high grade of teachings in those ancient seers called rishis to always stand us in good stead. And like the teachings of the Upanishads, which make up our path, which we call Vedanta, and which Swami Vivekananda brought to this country and gifted to us in 1893 when he appeared at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago at that time. I was fortunate enough to appear in the Parliament of Religions in 1993, 100 years later, and be a part of his work 100 years after his appearance, and be able to sing some of these to the American people, some of these very bhajans and stotrams. So it's wonderful to be a part of that in any way. And so when you like to turn your heart and mind and your voice towards helping people with what you feel is the greatest, maybe the only solution to suffering in this day and age, would be to study the Dharma teachings with an illumined preceptor. And a short version of that, you might say, in the West today is the receipt of mantra diksha, or your mantra that you receive from your teacher, whom you choose as your guiding light, your pole star in this life, as my teacher used to say to us, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj. May peace and bliss be upon him. So all of that is a great boon and gift of spiritual life, of spirituality overall. And by spirituality, we don't mean the occult or seances or spooks or spirits and all that. We mean the highest flights of philosophy from India that speak in terms of the relationship between the apparently individualized soul and the Supreme Soul. We call that Jivatman and Paramatman. Or as Tantra would say, Jiva and Shiva are one. My teacher used to say that from his own lectern when he would discourse on the Dharma, which he did week after week, days after days, for 40 or 50 years that he spent in the West as one of the followers of Swami Vivekananda and the Ramakrishna order, a sannyasin they call it, a true sannyasin. And so those souls, free or about the business of being free, or about the business of getting you free, however they're appearing to you, are an integral part of the guru-shishya relationship, which is very noble. I found myself writing about it in my latest book, which is almost finished now, which has all these charts in it, and is about to come in to print, probably, we hope, this year. So last week, you remember that we took these charts, some of them, and it all started off with the subject of this series, Mind is the Kingdom of Heaven. So this chart, Mind is the Kingdom of Heaven Within, I want to just refer to it real quick because it was the main chart in the first class, which was last Sunday. And we're going to segue into the second chart afterwards, and it uses these same powerful kingdoms, or akashas, or lokas, or bardos, or as the top quote says, my Father's house has many mansions. So it indicates that if the kingdom of heaven is within, then we're looking at it as something that's within the mind. It's a projection. And it's not a philosophy or even a theory maybe that's very popular or very well entertained in the West. It really comes from East, particularly India. And when you talk about mental projection here, maybe the way the mind would go in a kind of Western psychological sense is that these are false projections that based in delusion. But there are projections that are based in higher reality too. We know that the seers have their mental projections, and they're not accompanied with delusion. They're accompanied with saving graces and boons, spiritual boons and blessings that they confer upon us. Ask any of thousands of people who have followed authentic gurus to find the truth of this fact. So what we want to look at then is less and less towards the negative or the earthbound, and more towards the illumined mind. Like in our tradition, we say manana, or manas. It's and I have a chart that goes through some of these sayings today too, we might get to. But we talk about the dual mind, manas, and that's where a lot of this projection takes place, and where a lot of these dualities that beings like Ram and Krishna caution you about, dvandva mohena, deluding pairs of opposites that keep you confused and based in two-ness, like virtue and vice, pleasure and pain, good and bad. The mind flip-flops back between these and doesn't seem to find any peace until you find a sort of third element in it that either combines them or pierces through them or transcends them. Different ways to deal with the dualities. But people caught in them are suffering the effects of them, and that's where the word karma comes from to a great extent, is by following these dualities as if they were your only recourse in life. And that peace of mind is not a recourse, or bliss, unalloyed, unaltered, unalloyed bliss is not a recourse, or that transcendence is not a recourse, or that even basic contentedness is not a recourse. What to speak of equanimity of mind not being a recourse. So you could point to a lot of the beings that inhabit these deeper realms of mind and who come out of mind, like you have done, and who return to mind unscathed, for the most part. Sri Ramakrishna said, if you wear white clothes and go into a furnace room, then no matter how careful you are, you come up later on your way to whatever event you dressed for and find that their little soot has gotten on your pants leg or on the hem of your gown. Basically, that means if anyone who comes to the world has to suffer some effects of being there in such a gross and dense atmosphere, where birth and death are seen to be real, where virtue and vice are seen to be actual. And these things disappear in dream and deep sleep for the most part, especially in deep sleep. So this chart was a way of putting together this idea of taking everything back to the mind. Manaha kalpa jagat is the word. If you want to know the actual word in India, it's a nice many-syllabled, three-portioned word, manaha kalpaha. So it's the mind's projections that projects jagat, the world. So there are words in English that aren't here, in Sanskrit that aren't here in our English language, that actually define and outline that occurrence of the mind producing, and this projection would be the many chambers in the Father's mansion. There's so many minds thinking all the time. So you have 7 or 8 billion here on earth, they're thinking all the time, you see. Maybe their thinking runs the gamut of false thinking and mithya gyan, and maybe also has a tendency to drift towards the secular and settle on that. Or maybe it has the ability more, or the tendency more, to fantasize, to imagine, and like cartoon movies and Hollywoods nowadays. It's all this kind of imagination. But then the higher thinking of the seers, we also have to point that out, how their projections are powerful, and they also make sure not to get caught in their own projections. Beautiful Sanskrit sloka in the non-dual scriptures of India states that what does the yogi or the seer do with his mental projections? He lets them rise spontaneously and naturally, but then dissolves them back like bubbles into water at the end of every day. So you ought to think of these thoughts as bubbles rising out of an ocean, and then you have to, instead of collecting bubbles, see, I'm forever blowing bubbles. That was a song back in the 60s that just occurred to me. Instead of blowing many bubbles and collecting them, as it were, you have to make sure that you consciously and actively dissolve them back in to the mind from which they came at the end of every day. And your meditation would facilitate this. So there are other, maybe a few more powerful ways to use the yoga of meditation, Dhyan yoga or Raja yoga, but there are much worse ways to use it too that they're out there. So one of these is to use the power of the mind to dissolve everything. That's why I chanted at the beginning, Mano, Nabudhi, Sharira, Indriyam, Tanmatram, Bhutani, Nabhuta Panchakam. The one who dissolves all of those, mind, intellect, the five senses, the gross senses, and the elements, the five elements, and the tanmatras, the subtle elements, takes those along with the ego and dissolves them back into Brahman. Brahman is that ocean, and you have the ability to use these tattvas, which are mind, intellect, ego, and so forth, and use them in a way in which they will not accumulate stains of charcoal from the furnace room of the world on your divine heavenly gown, which you want to keep pure and white so you can enter into the kingdoms of heaven. Now, the way I put it last week was we're left with two other recourses or alternatives. That's to look up and see that conventional religion quite often thinks about heaven being above us, as this quote which I put here on the chart says, or to look back in time and see how science proposes that we came in an evolutionary way through not even one-celled yet, but partially, then one-celled, then through a series of incarnates in evolution into the human form through animals and so forth. So both of these things are denied at the level of mind as heaven. They're accepted at the level in which they occur. That is that if you look back in evolution, then you're talking about one world only, and that's the loka. So we looked at that last week as being humans, animals, insects, and plants. That has a certain reality of its own as one of the seven worlds. Because if you count the seven worlds, you have Bhuvar, Svahar. Some of that sounds familiar to you because it's the beginning of the Gayatri mantra that's so famous and chanted by millions of people every day, even in this day and time. And then over here you have Mahar, Jana, Tapa, and Satya lokas, which are realms that are generally seen to be beyond the need to be reborn in these three realms again. Because to be reborn in these realms is sometimes quite painful. Yakan Jeman Vidirlikan Sheru Bejabe Shedin Yakan Jeman Vidirlikan Sheru Bejabe Shedin Abile Bishad Gopite Praman Balile Bishad Gotibe Praman Kalina Buli Bijadin Shukir Vashana Karo Arkadin Shukir Vashana Karo Arkadin. So he sings, misery and misfortune will come if you do not chant the name of the Lord and of the Mother of the Universe. But even if it comes, remember, whatever happens, know it to be the will of Divine Mother and surrender yourself to it completely. Because otherwise, if you don't do this, then how long will you cling to this empty life of relativity? Where a desire for earthly things happens again and again in cycles, he says. Misery and pain are the outcome of limited existence. How many more lives of ignorance can I bear? So he's taking his, to task? His mind to task, because his mind is projecting these worlds. Projecting them, yes, in a way of a kind of fantasy, but also in a way of a kind of dream, but also in a way of a kind of higher thinking. Because if he's thinking about going to heaven, which many of our Christian people do, and many of the Hindus do too, if they're thinking about that, then they want to join their ancestors in heaven, and they go up one rung of the ladder to the Bhuvar loka. So you see here semi-divine beings. The semi doesn't mean that you're fully realized. It means that you've realized enough good action and good karma on earth to be able to consciously go to a heavenly loka. We'd call that a loka in or one of the chambers in the Father's mansion. You might go up one floor, you see, of this many-tiered mansion. So this is all the dynamics of rebirth, the dynamics of transmutation, of transmigration. These all have to be encountered and seen through in order to destroy the tendency to tend upon lower worlds, so that you can get free from them and reach a non-dual state. And if you just try and jump to the highest step from, say, Burloka to Satyaloka or beyond, or what people are trying to do today, trying to jump from the physical body in their meditations straight to Brahman or straight to Satori or straight to the beatific vision of the Lord, then you've left all these other worlds filled with some karma that you still have to pay. And quite often people get dragged back to earth and find themselves again in the human form. So this process can go on, and they call this cycles of samsara. So this chart we looked at last week saw that this basically had 3 tiers to it when we talk about the realms of reincarnation. And the main point is that it's all a combination, it's all a manifestation of the mind. Now, let's see, what my little old mind can create all this. It certainly participated in it, because you've got so many billions of people holding this world right now in their minds. We used to say that our founder, Lex Ixon, used to walk up to us and say, you know, this very room and everything here, and it is in your mind. So he was trying to bring you into the realization that you're just walking around in a chamber of God's house called the mind, the great mind in this case, the cosmos or cosmic mind, the Mahat, they call it in our tradition. And that just like you can move up and down the 7 floors of a palace, as Sri Ramakrishna used to talk about the 7 centers of Kundalini Shakti, and you'd move up and down these 7 centers, because consciousness, when it transmigrates dreams, and tends to do that. But the idea is that you have the power to move. So if you're stagnating and not moving, then basically you're caught in one world kind of scenario, and that's the problem with science focusing on the physical only, like you were once an animal or something. And so you had no other recourse but to move from body to body, just in the physical sense, and you had no higher thinking attached to it, called intelligence or consciousness. A lot of the, whether they're debates or whether they're seminars going on today, if you see them on the web and so forth, if you get a somewhat open-minded scientist and a spiritually oriented person who's coming from Buddhism or Vedanta and so forth, and they get together and talk, basically the whole thing is around whether consciousness exists or not, whether there's a separate, let's call it substance, a divine substance within you that transcends everything, and which also at the same time acts as the basis for it all. Because in that sense, then you're putting everything in perspective, and you're seeing that you can have good dreams, or you can have bad dreams, or you can have good karmic effects or negative karmic effects, and all of these things are basically seen by the mind. The mind's the witness. So we're saying that the mind should be the witness. That's called manasakshi. Manasakshi. The mind is the witness. But the mind as the victim of karma is called karmana. So that same mind that can open the gates of heaven, as Sri Ramakrishna said in the quote we looked at last week, can also descend through the gateways of hell into lower thinking and suffering. Suffering is, the ocean of suffering is the hell, which we would talk about in our tradition. And the most probably clarifying thought in it all would be to say that this is all going on in my mind. It's not like I ever moved from heaven to hell as a physical location, because they don't exist as physical locations. They exist as projections of your mind, and consciousness is dreaming them all the time. The three movements of your breath, the three movements of your consciousness, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, all these triputis that are there, the three worlds, are all telling you about this movement of consciousness in the mind. This consciousness is as yet unawakened, because beings come back from earth and they've been to heaven, but they can't remember it. They can only believe in it. So they're not proving it to themselves yet by actual meditation. So that's why we would enter into a study of it, and from the standpoint that consciousness is the only reality, not whether or not it exists or not, but it's actually contains intelligence, and it's that intelligence which is doing the projecting. Now, if that intelligence is dumbed down, as we say, and darkened, then it projects the worlds of war, worlds of suffering, worlds of selfishness, worlds of materialism. And if, on the other hand, it doesn't prefer to use its thoughts and its energy to project that, it'll start projecting cloud castles in the sky kind of thing, you see. So there are different, that's what heaven is. It's a kind of chamber in God's house that you would visit, but there are still other floors of this mansion inside of you, like Sri Ramakrishna's talking about the palace with seven gates, 7 floors, which are the 7 chakras in the Kundalini system. And I mentioned last week about how there are many different 7 systems in Judaism and Hinduism and Christianity and so forth, Buddhism. And so there seems to be a general overall occurrence between the religions of the world about this subject of the kingdoms of heaven within you, but not a lot of proving being done. Proof would have to come from your philosophy. So your philosophy would have to inform religion about the higher experiences that it had with the mind. So higher mind will give birth to these philosophies, like the darshanas, and all the seers of India have admitted this, that they've come out of the mind, produced a body, and they've gone back into a bodiless condition, and they've become aware of this. The Tibetan Buddhists nowadays are very good at explaining this, the bardos, and how they would come out of these systems. So they're doing this with their mind and with their intelligence intact. One of the ways in which we might do this is to practice conscious dreaming, or trying to take our consciousness into our deep sleep state, say. So we have to keep ourselves aware and conscious with our tendency is to open this third eye, which, by the way, 7 different religions talk about the third eye that I discovered. I have a chart on that. Jnana Chakshu it's called, because that's what Krishna called it. And thine eye be single is how Christ called it, and the Dharma eye is how Buddha called it. And Taoism and other systems have their way of explaining it too. White dove ascending, or the back door to divine reality. So all of these have to be considered. They come from your philosophy. And so if you want to have a healthy philosophy right now, India has those still in this yuga, or in this time period of 480 some thousand years, as they look at it in India's system of time. In this Kali Yuga, of course, then you would have so many reincarnations going on, many people coming and going in and out. This wouldn't make sense if you used evolution to go back just 5 million years to where you first sprouted legs or something. See, so you would have to look at it as not backwards or upwards, but inwards. And this is what Jesus was trying to tell to the apostles. And you need to connect this to in the beginning was the Word. And that's where we're going next when we go to this chart, because these very worlds, Bhur-loka, Bhuvar-loka, and Swar-loka, are powerful words, or bijams, that if said at a very high level of consciousness, say from the Trinity, turn into worlds. They're the key sounds or symbols for those worlds. And so this would also communicate to you that the power of the word is very concentrated and has a lot of ability to produce an effect outward. So words used for gossip, or words used for worldly talk, or words used for superficiality, they're not going to have any effect. They're offshoots that have fallen a long way away from bijams, like bur, bhuva, swaha. So in that way, then, we're going to want to trace the origin of the word, like Jesus was trying to tell to the apostles, trying to take them to the Garden of Gethsemane so that they could meditate on statements like, in the beginning was the word, it was with God, and it was God. These need to be contemplated. In our tradition, we call that manana. We actually, manas means mind, so the mind has to take those and meditate on them to prove to itself and to open up the kingdom of heaven through words. Words that you're tracing to an origin. In the beginning was the word means, we think of that in India as Om. We spell it correctly, philosophically speaking, A-U-M. And A stands for the waking state, and U stands for the dreaming state, and M stands for the deep sleep state, so it connects directly the word to your consciousness. And A also stands for Lord Brahma, U for Lord Vishnu, and M for Lord Shiva, so it connects directly to the gods who inhabit the worlds inside of you, the kingdoms of heaven. You have to start making these connections, and as we often say in SRV, there's no such thing as a foreign religion. All religions are indigenous to your soul. So if that's the case, then you have to give up your hypocrisy, your narrowness, your limited thinking, and your childish puerile thinking that my religion is better than yours and my father can beat yours up and so forth. It comes from a very low way of thinking, very childish. Give that up and embrace the Dharma. Embrace yoga. Say Dharma first, because Dharma will give you the reorientation towards the truth. Then yoga as practice. And finally yoga as union, as what it was meant to be. So in this day and age, I think I have that on the chart, one of the charts coming in, is these 3 states of evolution of mind. Three states that you pass through are very much like going through these 3 worlds and reaching transcendence, the yoga of transcendence. It has to go through yoga of practice first, and then it has to start with the yoga of higher teachings, you see. And it's also one of the 3 types of liberation. So all these 3 systems are there, and there's 3 types of bondage too, so as you seek this liberation, you have to be very careful of coming up or bumping up against these demented ways of thinking, or fundamentalist limited religion, or philosophy that's under the press of Bhranti. You call that Bhranti Darshana. The philosophy got tainted by your mind. You didn't understand it right because you didn't have a teacher, or you had a spurious teacher. It wasn't taught to you right. Just like kids growing up with parents who didn't teach them right, and they end up as adults, making all these mistakes or not having any social graces whatsoever. In the same way, we went to a spurious teacher and they didn't teach you the true meaning of the Dharma and explain it very well to you, so you took it into a limited way of thinking and you started taking it into the world and spreading it, and it was called Bhranti Darshana by the father of yoga. Bhranti means delusion. So it's deluded thinking that you came out with. It was, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, half-digested religion, half-digested philosophy. So all of this as a kind of precursor, again, my usual prologue and a review, because we have the beautiful quotes of Buddha, of Jesus, of Krishna, and of Ramakrishna, and of Lord Vashishta, all here on this chart. If you want to look back on these later and review them, But basically coming out of this idea of the three worlds. And so if you were to say, bring peace to the three worlds, shanti, 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 that's one of the old refrains, you might say, of Hinduism and Vedanta and yoga and tantra and so forth. They all say peace 3 times. So it means, peace to the outer, peace to the inner, and then peace to what's beyond. Or if you say peace to the humans, peace to the celestials or ancestors, and then peace to the gods and goddesses. That's what these 3 worlds consist of. You see the 3rd world, lokas, Indra, Devas and Devis, which are gods and goddesses, Gandharvas, which are celestial musicians, and Apsaras, which are beings enjoying a kind of blissful state in this 3rd realm of higher heaven. You could call this earth, lower heaven, and higher heaven if you want. So if you were to want to understand how this is inside of you, one of the best ways is through Shabda Brahman. You'd have to go to the path of God as sound, which basically means reality as vibration. And so you would have to begin, as science has begun, looking at the vibrations here and how some of them are hidden. And unfortunately for physical science, since it's only just physics, they've looked into what I call the internal of the external. They've taken the object and they've looked into its internal component, and they found vibrating particles that change at a billionth of a second, subatomic particles. They have to realize that the alambana that they took for their great study is a projection of the mind, and it's concretized. The thought produced the world, so of course it would produce the object. And the object is showing itself up to be empty because it is containing particles that don't have any basis in reality. They have a basis in change, constant change that's too fast for the senses to comprehend. So what you're looking at here very plainly and very accurately is just an illusion. And that's where the emptiness of Buddhism comes from and so forth, which even the more recent contemporary Buddhist teachers like Dalai Lama said that's a stage on the way to realizing Buddha nature, is to see the emptiness of objects. But if you can't admit that yet, you've been hypnotized by looking at the internal of the external, then the tendency to move inside to the kingdoms of heaven is going to be missing. It has gone missing in you. You don't have the inner leanings anymore to find out what the origin of the object was, and you've become hypnotized by what the object consists of, which is empty. It's empty of the desire to fulfill you, too. It's not just empty of substance, unless you want to call particles changing at a billionth of a second some kind of substance. But if you want to give it credence that has some meaning and substance, you can say it's empty of substance, but it's not empty of essence. There's a ground for it, an unchanging ground. And we call it words like Brahman and consciousness, Chaitanya, and so forth. And the states that you pass through, the lower samadhis, which are seeded with words. They're told to you by words like savitarka, nirvitarka. All of yoga points directly to the fact that you're experiencing different kinds of samadhi. And you can have a samadhi of objects. It's not a very high samadhi, but if consciousness is attached to it, then your objects are bringing you contentment. It's called sattva. You say, oh, I've got everything I need. It's not like some of the songwriters of our time here, whose bank accounts are like 500 or 600, 800 million they made from just writing a few songs or playing an instrument. And they still don't have enough. You see, they want to build their bank accounts up and so forth. It's not only happening to politicians and people whom we knew were under the press of materialism. It's also happening to people who occupied the New Age in the 60s and wanted to be free. So when you see that happening, and you have manosakshi, you have a kind of mind that realizes this is the projection, but you want to witness it and not get pulled into it, because great beings, like scientists, great beings in the sense that they have very profound intellects, have been sucked into examining the unreal. The very examination itself is opposite of the truth that they're actually seeking. And we call this in India origins, or utpatti, like in the beginning was the word. If you studied the word and you knew that it correlated with the worlds, there's a system in India called the 6 ways of finding Brahman, through words and alphabets and thoughts and mantrams and so forth. Sadakya, it's called in Tantra. It's a great system because it points out very definitely how these words of power, the gods and goddesses that speak them internally in the realms that they occupy, are all ways of finding your way to Brahman. But of course, if you're just stuck on the very outer world, like Bur is all you knew about, then shifting over to this chart, and we will right now, which is called the 4 celebrated mystical utterances. So remember, a mystical utterance would be a very powerful word that is lodged in the minds of the great ones. The great ones here probably meaning from the Trinity down to the Mahat, because the Trinity is a kind of higher form of the Mahat, cosmic mind. So if you were to look at the word Bur, and that's all you knew, then you would be pretty much here in the realm of what's seen here as sun, senses, moon, herbs, trees, flowers, water. We have English words for these things, but the overall word to categorize them all together would be Bur. This is all the realm of physical things, physical bodies, 5 elements, their combinations, and so forth. So you can see them all spread out here on these various lotus leaves that are there floating on the waters. As one of the Upanishads says, "Verily, through the sun come all worlds, through the moon all lights, through Brahman all the Vedas, and through food all animate beings are magnified." So you have these connections from the vyahritis, the different words, different connections and combinations of things that come together, like man, woman, child. This would all come from a word that signifies it all. So your study of words in the tradition would be to uncover not just the outer meaning of the word, which you hear floating across the air and striking your eardrums, and you come to know some sort of understanding about what these chain of words mean, and that's an exterior manifestation of the inner meaning of the word. And that is an outer manifestation of the beginning was the word. So you'd have to go back to find these seed words in order to understand how things got projected by the mind. And so words become very, very important in that inner journey. And that's why I was just saying they gave you the mantra, you see. Probably not many people are watching right now, but maybe they'll watch in the future. But there are probably people who, are attracted to this because they want to know the inner meaning of their life, and they want to know the inner meaning of topics and subjects that they didn't learn from secular subjects that didn't take them that deep. And it was up to the individual to take them deeper. So you as a spiritual aspirant are to take a word like bur, meditate upon it as a foundation for Brahman, and then move in with the understanding of that level of things to the next world, which would be Bhuvar. So this is what great seers do all the time, like Mahachamasya here, in this quote from the Taittiriya Upanishad. Bur Bhuva Swaha. These are verily the three celebrated mystical utterances. In addition to these, there is a fourth called that Mahachamasya proclaimed, and that was called Mahar, of course, or Maha. That one who meditates upon these, called the four Vyahritis, comes to know Brahman, and to that auspicious one all the gods bring homage. We also mentioned that quote last week in our class. So this, we're to wonder about how this great rishi, Mahachamasya, came to know about the Mahar here. Because at the time he was living, nobody knew about the higher worlds. They only knew about these three, and most of them only knew about this one. Does it sound familiar? That's what everyone thinks is real. They think that's life. They think that you die there, you're born again. They don't even think that far, you see. They don't question whether or not they're on a loop that takes them from birth to death and death to birth. They conquer all who conquer self, but otherwise this thirst for life on earth forever quench, because it drags from birth to death and death to birth the soul. The soul means the transmigrating soul, not your Buddha nature, your Atman. That doesn't transmigrate. Right now we're going to have to leave that sacrosanct and most interior and find that that's the originless truth of things. But everything that has an origin needs to be inspected, and it's best to inspect it in levels. So from the infinite, the finite has come. So you take the finite, you meditate upon all of these things that we just said, sun and moon, like they did. To the sun they found came all worlds, and through the moon came all lights. They meditated upon these as words, like Surya, they had these powerful words, and they meditated on them, and they worked their way from outside back in. From the infinite, the inward, came the external. So they, if that were true, then they had to then connect the external to the internal. These connections are missing in our Western way of thinking, and in any kind of philosophy that was given to us in a short amount of time also. So we're going to have to look, say, at the, candle flame, to the firefly, to the campfire, to the bonfire, to the forest fire, to the sun, to the millions of suns in the sky, and follow these lights backwards to their origin. And in the case of lights, you'll find it takes you back to the fire of intelligence. That was in your mind that caused you to be able to project the worlds of a million suns. See, you and your cohorts, you and all of those who entered into the mental dream. Mass collective mental dreaming is like what I like to call it. Manaha Kalpa Jagat. All the worlds were created by this mass collective mental dreaming. And if you were to prove to yourself that when you die you're just reborn again, and you remember your past lifetime, that's the beginning of understanding that this recycling process did not kill your soul. It probably didn't even kill your ego, unfortunately. And your mind was just, again, ripe and ready for the next projection. See, so the whole thing is cyclic, like Buddha said, and it's going on and on in cycles. And that's like being in a river and not getting on the banks to observe it. So you have to get out of the banks of this transmigration process, and with your mind, manosakshi, you have to observe it. And so you probably need a teacher to help you understand what you're observing, and the scriptures based on seers who themselves did that observation and came up with certain conclusions, like Vedanta Siddhanta, Nirukta Esha, Brahmaiva Jivaham, Sakalam Jagat Cha. They found that everything, even time and space, was Brahman. But they had been looking at it differently because everything that was projected by the mind, they didn't do it as a witness. They did it and then they got into it as if it were real. But the first thing you hear in Vedanta is that Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya, that the world's not real, Mithya, it's a projection, and only Brahman is real. So that's a very important saying. If you can align your consciousness with Brahman, then you have this higher understanding. If you align it with the world, then you fall into the worlds of transmigration and suffering. The whole ocean of suffering and the problem of suffering is wrapped up in that mistake, in that primal error, in that mula vidya. So different words can explain this to you, which doesn't it prove that words are very powerful, because we're not sitting here in front of the camera doing these live streaming classes year after year speaking any words that aren't profound to you. We're not wasting time here. We're going straight to the heart of the philosophy of India. All its darshan is over thousands of years with saints and seers and sages and savants and saviors that have realized these truths and are now handing them out to you. Unfortunately, it's like trying to, sit by the river to sell water, you see, as the Sufis say, to try and convince people of this day and time that this is something they ought to be looking at. Because the outside is not satisfying, in fact it's causing them suffering. It's not bringing them contentment. It's bringing them malcontent. It's not bringing them peace. It's causing them restlessness. And these things have become chronic. It's not giving them divine reality called God or Brahman or Allah. It's giving them this false idea of a world being real and a godless culture that now inhabits it. That's America. The God that they do believe in here is questionable. That's why so many people are leaving the sinking ship of fundamentalist religion. So it's going to have to be based on something that will prove to you the profound meaning of sound. I was starting to say, as Holy Mother told us when she was alive, Sri Ramakrishna's divine consort, Shabda Brahman, she liked that path. It's vibration, Shabda, sound, God as sound. So it shouldn't take you too much of a leap of faith or a jump in perspective to connect that, to say that she's talking about all of this being sound Brahman and vibration. So the vibration there that is the couch, or is the chair, or is the chart, the paper, is a vibration of external that came from the internal thought of your mind, which is another vibration. You have to connect one vibration to the other and find the origin of the word paper, or the word couch, or the word carpet. And it might seem simplistic at first, but the first thing you're going to encounter is the great five elements that make up these objects. You're enjoying them right now with your gross senses, but the gross senses came from these five elements. You can then trace them back to the subtle senses, the knowledge senses, then the subtle senses. This is the journey that leads you into the kingdoms of heaven. Otherwise you're stuck on the first floor of understanding all the time, which does not confer much understanding at all. And it doesn't satisfy you in the end. When even your intellectuals and your scientists and people who have become rich and so forth are not happy at the end of their lives, are not satisfied. The secular approach did not fulfill them because they never got along beyond the intellectual frame of reference, which is how my teacher used to put it. Because he had astute people sitting in his congregation when he taught Vedanta, and he'd say, you're following the Bhoga Marga, or path of enjoyment here in the West, and you need to get beyond that, because even your scientists and so forth are giving you this path of Bhoga Marga with gaining their power over nature, you see, over the five elements. They're being able to combine the five elements in certain ways to give you certain things that appeal to your comfort zones. and or worse, find out how much power is in the atoms that make up the object, be able to split one of those and blow up another country or something, something completely insane. Which really, if you take the judgment and criticism out of it, just means that everything here is full of Shakti. Even the particles that make up an object is full of power. We're walking around on particles of power. It's just that if we become satisfied with the gross vibration of Shabda Brahman, just the atoms of particle, we overlook the atoms of our intelligence that produced the atoms of matter. There had to be a source to them, and we went the wrong direction in order to try and find them. We went to finding the external of the internal. I'm sorry, the internal of the external. We looked into the object thinking it to be real and found it was made of a bunch of vibrating particles. So we need to reverse that trend and tendency, and the tendency that makes us look up to heaven as if there's some secret up there, or look back, to our ancestry as being animals. Those are the things that are deluded avenues that our mind fell into. They're not bringing you the truth. And so the Dharma, which talks about everything from mind is the kingdom of heaven within you, to if thine eye be single, you should know the truth, and all of the various worlds that exist within the mind have to be explored on their own merit. And so that kind of vibration is going to be much subtler and much less apparent to people. Which is why, they will prescribe mantra, because mantra has some bijams in it, like the Gayatri, Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha. When you say that, you just said all the three worlds. Everything in them lies in those three words. Just like if you say Sri Ramakrishna, the avatar of this age, Kali Yuga. If you say his name, then you've got thousands and thousands of things that are associated and aligned with his name. His name now appearing in the mantra of 5 or 6 million people, who are meditating upon him. Well, why would people do that? Take a great form, meditate on the name. There must be some great power in it. And if you're one of those beings who have discovered some of the power in thinking about a great soul like that, like Sri Ram, they've been thinking about him for thousands of years, and he's still conferring power upon them. You say, there's still hundreds and thousands of followers of Ram and Vaishnavas and people in the world who time didn't make any difference to them. They still love him. And so his name, Ram, is a bijam. And it's become watered by the love and devotion of many people. So it contains great power. And you need to take that and say it and think about it in your mind and think about his form in your mind. It's in your mind, you see. It's not in your mind as an illusion or a delusion. It's in your mind, not in your mind as a fantasy. It's not in your mind as a mere imagination. It's a visualization of something that exists. And that visualization today will become tomorrow's realization, as my teachers used to say. First, it's an imagination, then it turns into later it'll turn into a realization. So, but all of this process is being actuated by this mind. So if the mind is purifying itself, just like the senses had to be pure, and then you could get to the pure mind, because with the gross senses being impure, you stayed outside and were content with external things, so you never saw the makeup of the mind. You saw maybe the brain and its connection with the senses and the objects, but you didn't find heaven, which are the subtle objects. And maybe once you found heaven, didn't go beyond heaven to higher worlds. So back to this chart again there, you see that some of these lotus flowers have assignments on them, like mind is one of them. That's right on one of the flowers, not on the leaves. And breath, and prana, ethers. thought. See, those four are very key to the next world. See, I mean, if you examine thought and mind and prana, as we've often advised that you do, because a lot of those things are missing in our meditations today, then you've stepped away from the external worlds of sun and moon and water and so forth, and you've done it. Those words now show up their origins, utpatti, and those origins are now back inside of you in your mind. So now you've made that connection to a second level of your consciousness. You might start giving up the idea that heaven is up there somewhere and I'm going to visit it later through some post-mortem emancipation, as my teacher used to say. I don't care for heaven. The Vedantist doesn't care for heaven. We want to get to the origin of all the worlds, which is the witness of all the worlds, which is really myself. But I may have to take on a few higher tattvas in order to understand that, a few higher principles in my mind. So you can't go just to mind and thought and prana and expect to reach worlds that are beyond the gods, like Indra, the Devas, the Devis, and so forth. This has to be all inspected by you in your own meditations, in your own consciousness, under the auspice that they exist there, see. Because this can't be an imagination or a possibility. It has to be a probability to you. And then from a probability it can turn into an actual reality. That this is the way you think, that the mind created the worlds. That my Father's house has many chambers, and that the kingdom of heaven is within you, and that in the beginning was the Word. I mean, you take these things seriously and literally, and you roll them over in your mind. So mind and thought and the energy, prana, that you do it with, will reveal to you like ethers, not just the ether of the scientist, but the four other ethers which occupy the mind. The ether of your ancestors, the ether of the celestials, the ether of the gods and goddesses, the ether of the rishis, like Tapar Loka, Jana Loka, and the akasha of the Trinity. You see, these are all ethers, 5 of them, that correspond to these 7 worlds we're talking about. So there is the word ether in English. Take its equivalent, say akasha in Sanskrit, and you'll see the difference between the two languages. English is going to have to dovetail itself into the inner meaning of worlds. If you say ether, actually we have to make that word dovetail somehow into akasha. And so we'll know that this one physical world came from 4 subtler worlds, 4 other akashas. And now we have cosmology in front of us, true cosmology. And now we can study it. Yes, you're a Samkhya scientist now, not just a physicist. And you're dealing with atoms of intellectual power, not atoms of physical power. Which is why the great souls pierce the curtain of Maya for you and let several 100,000 souls in each age into higher thinking. They hold, like Atlas, they hold up the curtain of delusion so you can scamper under before they let it fall, and then another avatar has to come on with new strength and lift it up in another age. So this is going on constantly so that beings can scamper under the curtain of Maya when it's been penetrated by the great thought of an avatar. And the sons and daughters of the avatar help with this process. Your gurus and the rishis and the truth-sayers, the great philosophers, the founders of the religions like yoga, Vedanta, Buddhism, Jainism, and so forth. All of this about the connections that we need to make in the path of goddess vibration or Shabda Brahman, and how important words are, not just spoken by the lips as physical things, but what it causes your intelligence to do, what it causes your mind to do. Like if your mind gets inspired by talking about Dharma, then you know you've reached a deeper level of the meaning of the word. You're entertaining the subtler vibration in your mind, and that's going to be healthy for you. It's going to wean you off of the lesser, more risky and dangerous vibrations of lower words. You know, like superficial words and gossip and fault finding, all of this kind of thing. You'll just wean yourself off of that and you'll be content. Your mind will now want to reach higher and higher levels of the manifestation of the word to the beginning, when the beginning of was the word. So you can see there Mahachamasya was meditating in this way, and when he was meditating on Bur, what he saw was prana, which is breathing and life force, fire, the earth, Bur itself, and aligned that with the Rig Veda, the Rig Veda that explained these connections. Then meditating on Bhuvar, so everything in the Bur Loka meditated on, then went to Bhuvar for the connections for this outer world to the inner world, all in the mind, shifted the consciousness to the next level of thinking and found air and found the inner regions, sometimes that's called the intermediary region of the elementals and lower siddhas and so forth like that, and found the out-breath, because so the in-breath, it says there is the Bur Loka, and the out-breath is then Apana, it's called, is the Bhuvar Loka. So it connected with the movement of your breath. Then when you meditated on Svaha, called Suvaha there, found the origin to the suns, and by the way, before connected that to the Sama Veda, Bhuvaha, because the four Vedas were connecting to these realms, because the Vedas are full of words about them. You see, sort of proving their existence of them in the realm of words. So Svaha was the third world, heaven, the sun, and Vyanaha, the arrested breath. So you have an inner breath is one world, the outer breath bespeaks of another, and then the arrested breath bespeaks of a third. Sort of like you're waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. When in deep sleep your breath stops for long periods of time. Or when you're meditating and your mind gets higher and you stop breathing and you don't even know it, like in deep sleep. Kumbhaka, they call that, is another powerful word in India. Kumbhaka is the arrested breath, but it's naturally arrested. And you don't even know that you're not breathing, but you're conscious in meditation and you've left the body and mind and senses behind. You've gone into the deeper recesses of the mind, and your body and senses forgot that they needed to act and breathe. And then when your consciousness came back, it activated them. So the whole process itself is a kind of proof of consciousness moving away from Bur Loka as if it were not even real, and then coming back and animating everything again. And prana is a very important, breath and so forth, life force is a very important aspect in this. In Hawaii we would call it mana, see. And maybe the higher reckoning of the word chi in Taoism and so forth. You have this idea in other religions about this special life force that's very important to the processes. So Mahachamasya mentioned the Taittiriya Upanishad was this great rishi who meditated on the three worlds. Now, most people weren't doing that. They were pretty much satisfied with the Bur Loka, just like nowadays. So it took a kind of different person to want to make these connections or maybe discover something apparently new. So like Markandeya walking through all 7 of these worlds, one day fell out of them into Brahman and had a powerful experience. So that was at a different time period. But Mahachamasya was taking up the 3 worlds, peace, 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 right? He wanted to bring peace to everyone's world and cure violence and suffering and various things like that, and bring highness and holiness into the whole process. So with his meditations he was doing this, when all of a sudden he fell through the cracks of the Svahar Loka and discovered the Mahat, the Mahar Loka. That's listed here, which is a realm of saints and seers and rishis, as if they were pushing through to reach the lower three worlds through a grunty or knot, and he was pushing the other direction, like with a nail knife digging in the sand, and all of a sudden the two met each other, and Mahajamasha started walking different skies. There's a teaching in our tradition by Lord Vashishta called the Walker of the Skies. So he was walking the Bur Bhuva Swahar skies, but then he pushed through and made an impression deeper into where? His own mind, which had higher consciousness and intelligence to it, and he espied the Mahar Loka, and the sages and seers that were there to welcome him. O ye shining ones, he was saying at one point to Indra and the Devas. Then he said, well, you don't shine so much, see, as what I just found. I found some true luminaries here. They shine by their own light, and called them, luminaries. Svayam Jyoti. Jyoti is light. Svayam means self. They shine by their own selves. They're like suns. They don't shine from any other light, as Vedanta likes to say. Well, what was still to be realized in that age was Janaha, Tapaha, and Satyam. And you can see that in this chart. Janaloka, Tapaloka, Satyaloka. All of this is the 7 worlds, but you don't look outwards for them. When you look outwards, you find worlds of earth, air, fire, water, ether. You find worlds of wood, different kinds of woods and forests. You find worlds of different kind of metals. You find worlds of different kind of herbs. You find worlds of different bodies of water. You find worlds of different forms of fire. That's all outward, you see. But when you penetrate inward, peace, peace, peace style, following the origin of words to their source, then you begin to find words that are much more powerful than the ones used to designate Bur, Bhuva, and Swaha. So if you're using the Gayatri mantra, then you have to know what each of those words means and what's associated or contained in them. And this is a diminishing of gross consciousness. See, you're just taking away everything by which the outer worlds operate under. Like going to sleep, you take away the worlds, don't you? Deep sleep, the worlds are gone. Or in a high meditation, the worlds are gone. So we have to think that consciousness doesn't consist of time, space, mass, angles, height, depth, breadth, width, because that's the way physics are thinking on the level of Bur. That's why they can't find consciousness. Since consciousness is so subtle that you have to go smaller and smaller and smaller into the particle or into the vibration to find it. And so your dreams are a good example of finding, like I've sometimes told you here in these classes and retreats, that I visit my father at least 6, 7, 8 times a year in my dreams. And I'm so amazed that I'm sitting there with him, and the thing that occurs to me in those particular dreams that recur is that he did not die. And we're sitting there talking, and I'm marveling at how beautiful our relationship is, and how he's alive. See? So my consciousness deviated away from the way of normal thinking that birth and death are real, and that the outer worlds are the only reality, physical is the only, and that he died, and that he was even born. And instead went to this beautiful space inside of the mind, which is a higher level of consciousness, in which I visited him, and we had that communion with each other. So this can happen not only in the level of your family and your ancestors, but with the gods. It's called darshan. Or with your guru who has passed, like Sri Ramakrishna. Didn't take long for Holy Mother to find Sri Ramakrishna in her meditation after he passed, you see, and had experience of him actually walking into the room, and he told her, Why are you surprised to see me? This was after he passed into samadhi. Why are you surprised to see me? I've just moved from one room to another. My father's house has many rooms, has many chambers. I've just moved from one room into the other. So you will call this a delusion or an invention or an imagination or a fantasy if you're pinioned to one world only. This is the way they have you thinking. But if you're not limited to one way of thinking, the physical atom is the only reality, and you begin to move inside in this meditation that dissolves all barriers with your faith in divine reality intact and so forth, then you will begin to shift your consciousness. That's a good thing to do before you so-called die here, you see, before you leave your body. Because there are many in Zen Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta and so forth, there are in yoga, there are these references to dying on your asana, you see. Like you die on your zafu, and your Roshi, your Zen Wosher wants to know if you died on your zafu yet. I'll actually ask you in Zazen if you've been able to die here. So it's not like you all of a sudden fell over and didn't breathe anymore and they had to come get your body and bury it. It's like you died right there. And probably it really means that your ignorance was dead. My ignorance is gone, gone, utterly gone, see, as the song in India sings. So when you then come back to the body and your ignorance has died and you walk up to your Roshi and said, I know what you mean now, I died on my zafu in this meditation. I practiced for years and years and finally had this Satori experience. See? And so that's been happening to thousands of people. We call them seers, saints, sages, illumined souls, rishis, like Mahachamasya. And these are experiences that are happening by the thousands and thousands in every period of time. Really in every lifetime, beings are turning toward the Lord, if you want to put it that way, or turning towards the Father or towards the Divine Mother. And you might say that some who don't turn completely, then they will reach a world, as Krishna says in the Gita, that they deserve. They will reach that God that they worshipped. See? If the God has anything to do with money, but their thinking about money was not selfish, then they'll reach a higher world where there's lots of money, you see. There's lots of wealth. There's lots of resources, because they still have to dream this dream of wealth. And when they come back to earth, they'll probably be wealthy persons again, or people who can put together mass and amass wealth, or any other kind of power. So the mind is predicating all this. See, it's basically what the mind thinks it becomes. And if it thinks only physical objects, it'll become enslaved to the world of physical objects and power. That power can turn violent, as we know. So in the Gospel, we were talking about it on the way to class today when we were driving, the chapter in the Gita called Daiva Sura Sampat or something, the division between the divine and the demoniacal. So people are using the mind to be demoniacal, and they're using the mind to be divine. That's how important the mind is as a pivotal place in the worlds. Lower mind, refined mind, a little bit more refined mind, subtle mind, pretty soon up to what they call no mind. No mind, no matter. No matter, never mind, as my teacher used to say, quip-wise in Vedanta. If there's no mind, there will be no matter, because your mind projected all the worlds. And if there's no mind, then no matter. It doesn't matter, you see. You've transcended the mind, you've gone beyond the worlds of production, and you're in a state of no mind. And of course that's a subject that we will probably refer to several times in this series of classes, but we're specifically concentrating on the connections between worlds so that we can step up that 7-stage ladder ourselves in meditation and fulfill all our desires on the way and take away all the obstacles that are there in the ability to leave the body and attain the highest, and then come back to the body if we so desire. Aurobindo called that moving up and down the amber stairs of birth and death. Some of our Tibetan lamas that we learned from and heard from about the Dharma do that all the time. You see, like they have many incarnations now for the Karmapa and for Dalai Lama and for Jamgon Khancho Rinpoche and other Rinpoches we met, even here in Hawaii, Kaldu Rinpoche and others in our own lifetimes. So these are abilities that the illumined soul will attain. And of course, they know that all of this projection is going on in the mind. Their attainments are also in the mind. But it's just a matter of what level of mind are we talking about. We're certainly not talking about gross mind, because we know the effects of operating under the auspice of the three gunas, like restlessness and darkness and so forth, and karmas that happen between your ancestors and yourself. Probably one of the most difficult things in attaining enlightenment is that you're going to somehow transcend your ancestors and get away from your family, as great souls have proven that you need to do, like Jesus leaving at 14 and be about his father's business, and Buddha leaving the palace of King Sakya, and giving up all his wealth and going out to practice asceticism. They've all moved away from family, only to come back later to help the family. So you can't be a part of the problem. You must be the solution. So we say you free yourself first and then free others. Like the airlines even know that nowadays. Make sure you put your own oxygen mask on before helping others, before helping your children. So you need to learn to breathe the air of Dharma, and then after you have, you can easily convince others this is a fresher breath you can take here. It's called cosmology. It connects to philosophy, and that philosophy connects to non-duality. Probably a good place to stop here for our break. And we covered most of this chart. We'll go on to another chart I have to show you that has a different aspect of mind as the kingdom of heaven within. So here we will take our short break.